Let's get analysis with Alexander Titov. He's a Russia Affairs analyst and lecturer at Queen's University, Belfast, speaking to us from London. Alexander, thanks so much for your time. So the head of NATO says Europe is, quote, ready and willing to step up for Ukraine. But what does that now mean, given what we've been hearing from the United States and Russia?
Well, nobody really understands it. I think that's the problem with the Europeans, because I think they can work well as long as there is, meeting of minds between European capitals and Washington. As soon as Washington changes its mind for whatever reason, there is a new election, there's a new administration, they have enough of, funding Ukraine. They can't do it anymore. Europe becomes in total disarray and doesn't really know how to deal with it. It just it shows how dependent really Europe is, despite all the talk about strategic autonomy and all those things which we've been talking for years and years and years. From the first Trump administration, there's been all this talk about need to be autonomous and independent and so forth. And now the crisis comes and they're absolutely unprepared to act by themselves.
Alexander, do you think Europe has now waited too long for that autonomy that you speak about? Because, like you said, for years they've been speaking about this. There have even been, talks with many European leaders saying that defense needs to be increased, which is something Donald Trump during his first term said to all NATO members, and he's now saying that again. Is it not time now that Europe looks at its reliance somewhat on the United States, an administration for the next 4 years that could be very interchangeable in its decision-making, going very much against the grain of what we've seen from previous U.S. presidents?
Yes, but I think there's 2 points. Well, first of all, the signs were already there that Americans are not be able to continue to fund Ukraine on the same level that they have done in the first 3 years. So the last big financial package for Ukraine of £60 billion it's been delayed for at least half a year in Congress, because there's simply not enough support to continue with high funding of Ukraine. Even if there was a different president, Biden or Harris, they would still have the same problem of throwing good money after bad, because it's so clear after a failed counteroffensive of Ukraine that Ukraine cannot win militarily. And Trump does it in a very kind of dramatic and sudden way, but basic underlying problem is there. What do you do with this war, which obviously is not going to be won militarily by Ukraine? Russia is having an upper hand. What do you do then? Trump wants to offer this quick solution, do a deal, and move on. If deal fails, then he can wash his hands and move on to other things. Europe are stuck with this previous strategy, which is obviously failing, and they absolutely have no idea what to do with it now that Americans are changing their mind. And all this talk about sending troops to Ukraine and so forth is just so irrelevant, and clearly shows they absolutely no idea what they're talking about, because there's nothing stopping them sending troops now. One day, what's stopping them is because they're afraid of having a direct contact with Russia. Russia will never agree to any NATO troops in Ukraine in any form or shape after the end of this conflict, if there is a negotiated settlement. So all these discussions among Europeans, it just shows that they are completely out of their depth and don't really have any idea what to do with it now.
How do you think then the discussions that will take place on Tuesday between the US and Russia in Saudi Arabia will go, given that there's no European representation or Ukrainian representation, although it's not to say that later down the line in more negotiations, the Europeans and the Ukrainians could still be part of those negotiations?
Well, I mean, obviously, Ukraine will have to be part of these negotiations at some level, at some point. But the key is, United States is the decision maker in the room. As I said, there are subjective factors for Trump, because it's not really his war. He's always been opposed to it. He's always been opposed to spending more money on it. He's not committed politically. He's been quite open about it during the election campaign that he's not supporting the continuing support for Ukraine. So for him, coming out of this war is actually, or not committing himself, getting deeper into it is a good thing. The only way of doing it, if you start talking with Europeans and with Ukrainians, obviously Actually, they just want to. They don't have any other ideas of how to do it, except for continuing as they did before. And it is losing, right? It's not going anywhere. So the only way to break this deadlock is for Americans to actually talk direct to the Russians, and then we'll see what happens. I don't think there's necessarily be a solution to it. There'll be some proposal, which probably will be rejected by Ukrainians and Europeans. The war will continue for another few months, another year, at which point they will probably come back to that and accept it. But, Trump will show that, you should have done it when I offered you, and now you're in a much worse situation and probably have to do it on worse terms. But it's basically kind of, there's no good way out for Ukraine, essentially, for it, and nor is there for Europe. And for Trump, who's not really into it, actually is in a good point that he can try to solve this problem. And if not, then he can just move on to somewhere else and let Europeans deal with it.
Alexander Titov, Russia Affairs Analyst, good to get your thoughts and perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you.